Nancy Abrams. Nancy is a graduate of the University of Missouri School of Journalism, where she trained as a photojournalist. She has worked as a photographer, writer, and editor at the Preston County News and the Dominion Post, where she edited the Sunday magazine Panorama. She holds an MFA in creative nonfiction from the New School and has been a professional writer and photographer for 4 decades. She's here today to tell us about her new book, which you can see here from WVU Press, The Climb from Salt Lake, a Memoir of Appalachia. Here's Nancy Abrams.
Thanks, Sean. If anybody has trouble hearing me, let me know, but that rarely happens. I'm short, but I'm pretty loud. I'm going to do 3 different things. I'm going to give a little talk about how the climb came to be, and I'm going to read a chapter from it, and then I'm going to show the pictures. I'm going to keep this picture up because it's one of my favorites, and I do mention it in the chapter I'm going to read. Those are the junior deputies, and I just thought while I was looking at it that I should probably put that on Facebook and find out if any of them are still around. So that's my next talk. So how many of you have read the book? And don't worry, you won't hurt my feelings if you haven't. So if you won't know the history. In the summer of 1974, I did an internship at a weekly newspaper in West Virginia. I spent less than 100 days in the mountains, in those green, cool mountains, and those days changed my life completely. Rich and Jerry, owners of the newspaper I worked for, encouraged my writing, they encouraged my photography, and they encouraged graphic design, so the whole package in the newspaper. They were really demanding and really critical, but we all believed that a newspaper could affect positive change in a community. And I went back and graduated from the University of Missouri, but when I got ready to graduate, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I ended up asking Rich and Jerry if I could come back to Preston County. And they said yes. So I had the highest title and the lowest salary of my graduating class. I was the managing editor. I loved my job. Every day was different. Journalism gave me the right to be nosy, to walk up to a complete stranger and start asking questions. I covered fires, barn raisings, and the annual Preston County Buckwheat Festival. I wrote obituaries. I met farmers, coal miners, quilters, and governors. The climb that is here on the table reflects years of effort, shaping my story and focusing on the details that matter. It took time. It took some major life changes. And those changes are the subject of my next book. But here's how the climb came about. I left journalism in 1991 and took a job at WVU's Health Sciences Center. I was manager of publications there for 10 years. I met my second husband when I interviewed him for a project called The Heart Book, and we married in 1998. In the spring of 2001, my husband announced that he wanted to take a job in New Jersey. I was appalled. I had built a life in Preston County and then Morgantown. I had a wonderful circle of friends. My younger son has Fragile X syndrome. He has intellectual disabilities, and we had a great circle of support for him. And we just remodeled our house, and I had my fantasy kitchen. So I sulked for a while, and then I made a deal with my husband. I said, I'll move, but I'm not going to look for a job. I'm going to do my own work, photography and writing. Nearly everybody said I would hate New Jersey, the traffic, the crowds. But 2 women who learned that our home was right outside of New York City offered more optimistic views. You're going to love the city, Heidi said, the art, the food. And then Gail said, oh, you can take classes at the New School. So we found an amazing house, a 1959 California style with a wall of windows that overlooked woods and a garden. It had space for a dark room. The local high school had a great special education program, a rarity in New Jersey, where most special ed students go to regional schools. Our neighborhood included a 2,000-acre park called South Mountain Reservation, and it really was a mountain, sort of. It was a small mountain, but it called itself a mountain. It may surprise you to learn that West Virginia and New Jersey have a lot in common. When you announce your movie there, people say, "Oh, I'm really sorry." Both states have distinctive north-south divides. They both have long histories of corrupt politics, and they're both secretly beautiful. So, but 2 months after we moved, 9/11 happened. You know, we could climb the mountain behind our house and watch the smoke pour out of lower Manhattan. It was just awful. But I'm not going to talk about that. That'll be another story. But I wrote my first chapter, the first version of Ramps, right after 9/11. And I wrote it for myself. I had a book in mind, and its working title was Food in the Mountains. Each chapter would have some mention of food, buckwheat cakes, ramps, apples, and maybe even some recipes. I really didn't know. I rationalized the chapter I wrote about war games. It's mentioned that the soldiers ate a turtle. That's really stretching. I started cataloging my negatives. I made prints, entered a couple of photography shows, and had some success. I found a yoga class, a book group, and a walking group. I made friends. One friend encouraged me to go with her to a writing group in Maplewood, New Jersey. My work met with some enthusiasm, but I'll never forget what one young man said. "That will never sell." Sell. I never considered my writing a commodity. I worked as a journalist, but that's because I never ever wanted to go into sales. That's sort of what this is, so bear with me if I'm uncomfortable. But about that time, I heard an ad for the new school on public radio, and I remembered what my friend Gail had said. So I signed up for a not-for-credit course in literary nonfiction. The new school is in Greenwich Village, and that semester was just bliss. I love Greenwich Village. Its scale, its history, and oh my gosh, the people watching is amazing. I even liked commuting. I took the train from my town to Hoboken and took the PATH train over to 6th Avenue. My classmates ranged from tattooed young striver to this Connecticut matron who was rich enough to hire bow and hunter sharpshooters to kill the deer in her estate. And those evenings were just transformative. Wednesday was my new favorite day, and homework my new favorite pastime. And I looked forward to every assignment. And though my heart raced every time I read my work aloud, the teacher in class seemed to like my writing. I met less success in the next class I took, which was writing for New York newspapers and magazines. I tried to be enthusiastic about pitching stories, about writing with an eye toward publication, but I wanted to tell my own story, even though that young man in Maplewood told me it wouldn't sell. My sisters and I inherited some money from our parents. My sisters bought expensive watches, and I applied to the new school's MFA program in creative writing. My statement of purpose included words and pictures. "Don't hold my visual submissions against me," I said. "I am a writer and a photographer. Asking me to choose just one is like asking me which one of my sons I love best." I knew I could write, and I've had lots of practice, but I longed for critical readers to feel how I felt in that first class at the new school, thrilled, scared, and occasionally proud. The day I dropped off my application, I went to see an astrologer. She told me I would find success, but it would take a long time. Before the new school, my writing stumbled at the intersection of truth and memory. What was I supposed to do when I forgot a name, or when the details were elusive? How could a journalist, trained to be concise, expand a piece? My quest to get the words out, to publish them, was really at the heart of my MFA. And during the 2 years I was in that program, 2006 to 2008, I was its oldest student. I was surrounded by students and teachers who cared about words. My memoir took shape. During my first semester, I decided the book would just cover the years I lived in Salt Lake Valley. Those parameters gave the narrative a focus and an arc. My fellow students and my teachers were encouraging. I can't give the new school enough praise. For our first 3 semesters, students were required to take a writing workshop and a literature class. I love being required to read. And I love being surrounded by teachers and students who are both critical and supportive. Greenwich Village worked its magic. I walked its narrow streets and ate my way through as many restaurants as I could possibly get to. Somehow I convinced my family that they could be happy even when I ignored them. I proclaimed the hours of 3 to 5 reading time. And that's a habit I've tried to maintain to this day. My last semester was devoted to my thesis. I'm grateful that the new school didn't require a complete manuscript. My thesis contained 13 chapters. The climb has 35. I often say that it took moving to New Jersey for me to write a book about West Virginia, but it took moving back for me to finish it. We moved back to Morgantown in 2009. By 2012, I had a first draft to share with friends who were serious readers. But it took 4 more years to revise and polish the work. In 2016, WVU Press accepted my manuscript, though they said it needed 2 positive reviews from some of their critical readers. Both reviews were positive, but one said significant revisions would be necessary. On WVU's recommendation, I hired an editor. We spent months making changes. A lot of people have asked me how I tolerated the editing process. I didn't tolerate it, I enjoyed it. The editor made it better. Editors, good editors, improve your work. I'm grateful to WVU Press for supporting my climb. Getting here has been a wonderful adventure. One of the real bonuses of this book's publication has been that it's reconnected me to so many people from my past, and I found some new readers too. One of the early questions I had trouble answering was, why did you write this book? But I've come up with what I hope is a satisfying response. I wrote it to say thank you to all the people who influenced my life. Just this year, I was able to thank Gail, the woman who reacted to my announcement that I was moving to New Jersey by saying, you can take classes at the new school. That sentence, that one sentence, changed my life. And that's what I want to leave you with. You never know how much a few simple words will change someone's life. When someone shows you their work, say something nice. Be encouraging. You don't have to lie, and you don't even have to like what they've done. You can say, this shows a lot of work. Or you can say, keep working. Be a positive force for creativity. And I don't have to tell you this, we're at a library. Read, 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 read. And you can take my idea, 3 to 5. Nobody gets to disturb you. That's sacred reading time. So now I'm going to read a chapter. Now, none of you have read this book. You don't know, I'm really not that nice. I behaved badly for most of my life, and some would say I still, well, never mind. The chapter is called Pot Roast. Here is a list of the Jews who lived in Preston County, West Virginia in 1976. Out of a population of 30,000, there was Simon, the doctor my friend had tried to set me up with, one veterinarian whose wife wasn't Jewish, one family who lived there just long enough for their son's bar mitzvah to be a front page story in the Preston County News, and me. Occasionally, I make the hour's drive to Morgantown to attend religious services at the Tree of Life Synagogue. I was a curiosity there, a hippie-like journalist who lived in the mountains, but the congregation made me feel welcome. A family that lived in Morgantown had a farm near Terra Alta and made sure I knew that they subscribed to the Preston County News. Then there was Mark, a single engineering student who was short, dark, and a little furry. Not really my type. Mark's accent revealed he was from Brooklyn. He spoke with intelligence and humor, even when he questioned the sanity of a nice Jewish girl living in Preston County. "Where do you shop?" he asked. "What do you do?" I described my home, a cabin high in the middle of 200 acres, surrounded by fields and forest, turkeys nesting in the pine trees, a silence broken only by the wind and the sound of coal trains rumbling through the valley, the big sky full of stars. I talked about my job. A couple of weeks ago, I covered the Bruce Mills Good Neighbor Day celebration, I said. I took a photo of the junior deputies, kids who want to be cops, trying to be cool while they waited to march in the parade. It's one of my favorite pictures from the summer. I told him how much I liked the pace of a weekly newspaper. Every week is different, I said, but there's a rhythm to the work, to the schedule. He looked skeptical. This was a challenge. It's beautiful there. You have to come up, I insisted. I'll make dinner. Jews were rare in Preston County. Blacks were also scarce. Hippies were the next minority. Men with long hair and women who went braless beneath ethnic clothing, even those born and raised in the mountains, were viewed with suspicion, except by bar owners who hired rock bands to lure their business. Veterans of foreign wars post at the bottom of Kale Mountain was a favorite hangout. When Fat Man's Face, the most popular local band in 1976, took a break from playing Leonard Skinner and Bad Company covers, the veterans stayed inside to play Freddie Fender and Mickey Gilley on the jukebox, while the hippies gathered in the parking lot to smoke posh. In just such a circle, I passed a joint and looked at the faces around me. I realized that I had found my tribe. This was where I belonged. The group often included two charismatic men, Charlie and Eugene, both locals. Charlie was the band's lead guitarist. He aspired to be a bad boy. He had long, dark hair and a mustache that drooped over a sweet grin. He made a living driving a coal truck, his hair nearly always drawing comments from the guys in the coal tipples. "Rock and roll," he growled good-naturedly in response. Eugene's expertise as a hairstylist was renowned, although he couldn't seem to tame his own fuzzy halo of golden curls. He fluttered his hands in giddy enthusiasm when he talked and never attempted to pasture straight. Since he was related to nearly everyone in the county, he was rarely harassed. He looked like an angel. Charlie was the devil. At every dance I flirted with him. "Come visit me," I said. "You know where I live." The Saturday Mark and his brother came to dinner coincided with the Perseids meteor shower. I had read about this annual celestial event, but had never seen it. The field beyond my cabin, far from city lights, would offer the perfect vantage point. "This will be a special night," I told Mark. I made my mother's pot roast, one of those easy 1950s dinners that used mushroom and onion soups. To prove I was at least a culinary Jew, I grated potatoes for latkes and made my grandmother's cheesecake. I heard their car making its tortuous way up my impossible driveway and walked outside to applaud Mark's arrival. "Is there another way down?" Mark's brother said, and remembered his manners. He extended his hand. "I'm Eric," he said. "Where am I?" He was slightly taller and thinner than Mark. "You're in Salt Lake Valley," I said, "between Terra Alta and Rollsburg. Almost heaven." I stuck my hands in my back pockets. "Dinner's not quite ready. Want to take a walk?" They followed me past the house, past the barn. The road bisected the empty field and headed up another steep hill. My landlord leased the field to local farmers who had just finished their second cutting of hay. The dusty, sweet smell hung in the air. The early evening sun turned the meadow golden. "It's beautiful," Eric said. He sounded surprised. This is not how I thought of West Virginia. We hiked slowly up the hill, occasionally turning to admire the rolling mountains behind us. I was used to the walk, but Mark and Eric were panting. I stopped, set my heels against the hillside. I pointed to the ridge opposite. Briary Mountain, I said. We were about half a mile high. Far across the valley, meadows like the one we had just crossed could be seen. Large, lighter green squares punctuating the thick green forest. I sighed with admiration. I never took the view for granted. I had come to understand that the mountains nurtured me. I waited for exclamations from my guests. Nothing. Are you interested in the Civil War? I asked. Eric nodded. The B&O Railroad runs through this valley, and during the Civil War, the train was a vital supply link for the Union Army. I pointed south. 4 sites near here were heavily guarded. The Amblersburg Trestle, the Iron Bridge over the Cheat River, the Tray Run Trestle, and the Tunnelton Tunnel. They were all built in the 1850s and were considered great engineering feats of the time. I paused. Worth a visit. I didn't volunteer to be tour guide. I could almost hear my aunt's voice. Nice Jewish boy, she would have said. But I didn't feel any attraction, no buzz, no romance. These brothers couldn't appreciate the landscape I loved, couldn't understand why I had chosen to live here. The 3 of us faced south and watched the sun move lower in the sky. It is pretty, Mark said. He sounded unconvinced, but I'm getting hungry. Back at the house, I handed out beers, motioned the guys to the porch stand. If you see a black snake, don't freak out, I said. He lives in the attic. Mark and Eric exchanged alarmed looks. Need any help? Mark asked. I laughed. You can come in. My entire house was 3 rooms, less than 600 square feet. I thought it was tiny, but I had never seen a New York apartment. The table was 3 feet from the stove, so it was easy to flip latkes right up to our dinner plates. The guys praised the pot roast and asked for more latkes. They ate with gusto, confessing that neither of them cooked. I was just clearing the dishes when the sound of a roaring engine drew us outside. A Harley-Davidson motorcycle pulled into the yard. As we watched from the porch, Charlie kicked his leg over the side of the machine, leaned against the seat, and took off his helmet. His hair fell almost to his waist. Hey, he said. Mark and Eric stared. This is Charlie, I said. He's a rock and roll musician and coal truck driver. I introduced the brothers. Hey, Charlie, I said. You're just in time for cheesecake. The 3 men filled my little house. Charlie took a look at the leftovers. He sniffed the pot roast. Can I have some of this, he asked. What are these? He leaned forward, pointed to a latke. It's a latke, Mark said. Charlie looked confused. Potato pancake, Eric translated. Charlie relaxed. We had Charlie try plain latkes first, then with sour cream, and then with applesauce. Eric launched into the tale of Hanukkah. Charlie helped himself to the rest of the latkes, furrowed his eyebrows. I didn't know there was Jewish food, he said. Then he looked at us. I don't think I ever met any Jewish people before. That's okay, Mark said. I don't think I've ever met a coal truck driver. Are you expecting anyone else? Eric asked. We stopped talking. The noise of an engine grew louder. From the front porch, we watched a car make its careful way up the hill. From any distance, I would have recognized Eugene's blonde halo. If Mark and Eric had been surprised by Charlie, they really didn't know what to make of Eugene. His arms rose and dipped bird-like as he entered the room. A party, he exclaimed. How exciting. Is that cheesecake? I leaned against the sink. I only had 4 chairs, and they were occupied. I used all 4 of my small plates to serve the cheesecake and put my own piece on a saucer. I poured coffee while the men quizzed each other. Soon the conversation turned to coal mining. Eugene sighed, then leaned his long frame back in a chair. Nance, don't you have some pop? He asked. Then he covered his mouth with his hand. Oops, he said. Was that uncool? He giggled. I held my breath a second, immediately uneasy. I didn't know how the brothers felt about pot. but I didn't think they would call the cops. I'd come to the conclusion that I wasn't interested in them romantically, so any pressure to be a good girl was off. "I'd smoke some pot," Charlie offered, pitching his voice low. I looked at Mark, raised my eyebrows. "I don't smoke," Mark said, "but go ahead." Eric nodded. "I'm not in law school yet. Don't mind us." I rolled a few joints, lit one, and chose an album, Brothers and Sisters by the Allman Brothers, to play. I sat on the counter, legs swinging, as Charlie, Eugene, and I passed the joint. We talked some more about coal mining. We talked about music. We ate more cheesecake. Around 9:30, I looked at the clock and shouted, "Oh my God, I almost forgot the Percy's." 4 sets of male eyes, 2 pairs bloodshot, looked at me. "A meteor shower," I explained. The guys shrugged their indifference, except for Eugene, who clapped his hands and trilled, "How exciting! Let's go see." Eugene and I left Mark, Eric, and Charlie in the kitchen, picked our way across the ruts in the road, and spread a blanket in the meadow. I lit another joint. We sat on the crunchy remains of hay, passed the joint, and pointed our chins to the sky. A few minutes passed. "I want to lie down," Eugene said. He patted the blanket next to him. We stretched out on our backs. The sky was a vast ceiling of stars above us. "Beautiful," breathed Eugene. "Watch the north," I suggested. "I read that's where they're supposed to be." An easy wind stirred the warm mountain air. We could hear the stereo faintly back at the house. A pale streak across the sky tickled my peripheral vision. "Did you see that?" I asked Eugene. I doubted my own eyes, high as I was. "No," Eugene whined. Then a broad white streak took a diagonal run just above us. "Oh my God," Eugene squealed. "It looks like something Disney drew," I shrieked. Then we saw another and another. Random white lines, some bright, some faint, dissected the sky. We giggled, then laughed out loud. "There, there," we pointed, and laughed some more. This was a show that needed to be shared, that needed witnesses. Who would believe such tales of a sky filled with shooting stars? "I'm going to get the others," I said, and stumbled down to the house. I blinked as I entered the bright kitchen, used my hand as a visor to shield my eyes. Mark, Eric, and Charlie hadn't noticed that the record had stopped. They were deep in conversation, talking about the differences between Judaism and Christianity. "It's magic," I interrupted. "You have to see." They pushed back their chairs and followed me to the field. They leaned back on their heels and watched the sky. I waited for the shouts of glee. "This hurts my neck," Mark said. He shifted from foot to foot. Eric yawned. Charlie's hair seemed even longer with his head back. "This is cool," he said, but his voice was flat, unconvincing. "It's more comfortable on the blanket," I offered. 3 heads shook no. Eugene flung his arms wide, not offended. We passed a few awkward minutes. The moon was rising, and the meteors were harder to see. "Well," said Mark, breaking the silence, "it's a long trip to Morgantown." Eric nodded in agreement. Both seemed relieved to be making their exit. We watched their car slowly head down the road. I plopped back down on the blanket, looked at Charlie, patted his face next to me. "Join us," I prompted. Charlie looked at me, then at Eugene. "Nah," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "Bad back." Where was the desire I'd felt for him before? Not here. I followed him to his motorcycle, gave him a casual kiss, then watched as he disappeared around the bend. Eugene straggled down from the field, wearing the blanket like a cape. He twirled it off and tucked it around me. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said. "I'll never forget it." I settled on the swing as this last set of headlights faded from view. A train, probably full of coal, made its slow way up the valley. The sound was musical and mournful. I sighed and leaned back against the oak slats. I hungered for a mate. My sister was married, my cousins were married, my high school friends were married. Would I ever find love? I lit another joint, hopped off the swing, and walked back into the field. I sprawled on the blanket and again tilted my face to the stars. The thing about my memoir is it's true. I didn't make anything up. Some people have asked me how I remember things, and mostly it's because I've told the stories in this book for 30 years. And I also have some pictures, so that's helpful. So now I'm going to show some pictures, maybe. I click something. Waited too long, huh? We practiced beforehand.
Please stand by. Here we go.
Yay. Just enough about computers to get into trouble. So this is the junior deputies that I talked about in that story. I am going to put it on Facebook. This woman is Vera Glazer. She is my maternal grandmother. When I was 12 years old, she gave me the autobiography of Margaret Burke White. How many of you are familiar with Margaret Burke White? She was one of the original live photographers, the first famous, well, first famous, but a famous woman photographer. She had this wonderful life. And that, again, when you think of the moments in your life that things change forever, that book, that was one of them. So that's Vera, and she was just like she looks. She looks fierce. She, when I became managing editor at Preston County News, she cut out the masthead and put it beneath the glass on her coffee table. So it's always good to know that somebody's proud of you. She was proud of me. These are sisters in Roseburg. These next few pictures were taken the first summer I was in Preston County. These girls, I found out when I was at the Terralta Library doing a reading, and somebody came and I signed her book, and she told me that these girls were her cousins. And I asked if their name was Moats. Now, in Preston County, Moats is a pejorative, and there's some of that in my book. And if there was one thing I would change in my book is I wouldn't let my friend Mary Jane make fun of the Moatses. I would have left that out. But I love this picture. This was one of the soldiers when, in that first summer, I was embedded with Green Beret in war games in Preston County. Though I didn't sleep there. What a good thing. This was following a soldier on this bridge, and this picture was taken just before I dropped to my knees and crawled back because I was freaked out by being able to see the water underneath that. This is me. When I was done with the soldiers, they decided they wanted to take a picture of me. Again, this picture was taken in 1974, and I printed it and sent it to my parents because just that summer, maybe it was in the spring, the picture of Patty Hearst was on the cover of Time magazine. So my parents were so proud that their daughter was like Patty Hearst. This was that turtle age. That was how I was going to rationalize this chapter for my first book. That summer, I followed a country doctor doing a story. There was a doctor shortage in Preston County, and we did an 8-page tabloid. And tabloid is if you fold the newspaper in half, and that's the size. I followed Doc Harriman around. This is house call. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to find the print that has the bottom of it because she has canned goods underneath her bed. It's really cool. And that's Doc Harriman. Also part of the experience of doing this book is his kids were able to get hold of me, and I was able to get them some photos. And there he is. This is one of my favorite pictures from that summer too. It's one of those pictures you take and you know it's good, but it isn't until you print it that you realize there's a little boy in the window there. And you know, I don't know that I remembered the dog. You know, it's got everything working for it. And that house no longer exists. This was just a pretty picture of a hay rake. I thought it was really cool. I didn't know that hay rakes are everywhere, and I don't care. I still like it. So that was my first summer, and when I got ready to graduate, I did a freelance job for the EPA. They did a project called Documerica. So this was the glamorous life of a freelance photographer. I'm also showing this picture because I was really proud that I had red hair, and alas, not so much anymore. But this was why, one of the big reasons I decided to go back to Preston County. In Preston County, I got to, again, go to people and say, let me take your picture. In 1976, I did a photo of every one of our community correspondents. And this is Mrs. W.R. Collins. And I mean, well, I'm not showing you any pictures I don't like, so I can quit saying, I like this picture, I like this picture. When I worked with the Dominion Post, I drove from Terra Alta to Morgantown, and often on the way to work, I would take a picture, and these are cute. Sometimes I wouldn't drive anywhere. This is Evans Curve in Terra Alta. This is the main road, Route 7, and I spent a lot of time. There's a chapter on snow. Actually, I don't like this picture so much anymore, but this was taken in '74, and I remember I printed that, and one of my professors at Missouri said, looks like she's scratching her balls. I told her I wasn't nice. This is Mrs. Howard. She had the Howard Hotel in Goldsburg, and she was about done with working when I was able to take her picture. Again, this is another picture I took on my commute to Morgantown. That's called the Prison Road. It was built by prisoners who apparently were really mad at the world because it's a terrible road. I like flags. I like taking pictures of flags. This was Terra Alta 4th of July. This is Grafton in Memorial Day. This was a lady who lived on the other side of Salt Lake Valley, whose family asked me to do a story on her because she lived without plumbing, and she hauled her water from a well. And she grew flowers, had a garden, and she just hauled water. She was in her 80s, and I want to be like her when I grow up. This was her house. It's a little tilted. And this, if I'm ever going to be famous for my photography, this is probably that photo. This was taken in Newburgh, and these are kids at a pool hall. You can't really read the sign back there. It says, no foul language. And I love that this little boy's fly is unzipped. Again, that was not something I noticed when I was taking the picture, or else I would have asked him to zip it up. This is another person who's in my book is a man named Jesse Jennings, who was a soldier that was my guide during the war games, and he ended up being the school board president. And that's his son on the ox, and that's our typesetter's uncle. So, actually, I hadn't printed this picture in 30 or 40 years, and a friend of mine in Chicago has a gallery, and I had a show there this summer, and this was one of the pictures he requested. So, it's sort of like having an old friend. And this was supposed to be the last picture in the book. These are my sons. This was after we moved to Morgantown. Well, I don't want to ruin the end of the book. And this was Samuel and Simon Jenkins. Oh, right, one more picture. One color picture. You know, this is a farm on Salt Lake that I own with a bunch of old hippies. It's a beautiful place, and I'm really fortunate to be able to go there as often as I can. How are we doing? I'm pretty good. So I would, if anybody has any questions, comments?
What age were you when you took your first picture?
So the question is, what age was I when I took my first picture? You know, I was probably only 9, 10, 11, and it was one of those fold-out brownies. And because I loved it so much, that's why my grandmother gave me the Autobiography of Margaret. She saw that I liked cameras and encouraged that. Yes, Lisa?
Yourself to be a person from where
I'm from Missouri. I grew up in St. Louis, and the week after I graduated from high school, my family moved to Kansas City. And I went to the University of Missouri, which is sort of halfway between them. Sometimes when people ask me where I'm from, I say I-70 Missouri. But, you know, I left Missouri in 75, and my sisters both still live there. My parents are gone, but I'll probably go back, but it's flat there. It's pretty. Yes?
That was my follow-up question. So as people age, they tend to come back, or go back to where they were raised.
Right. She says as people age, they tend to go back where they were raised. Well, I often say I grew up in Preston County. You know, Missouri really made me, you know, was the basis of who I am. And, but West Virginia just completely changed me. You know, when my husband dragged me away, I was just appalled. And then he sort of had to drag me back because I really liked New York. But, you know, it was far from the farm, and this picture. And actually, when I would drive there in the summertime, I would go there and stay sometimes 3 weeks or more. And as I said before, my younger son has some disabilities, and he gets a little squirrely around changes in his routine. And I remember getting to the farm in Terre Alta and opening his suitcase and realizing he had taken out all of his clothes and replaced them with stuffed animals. So, but I was lucky because we had gates. So, you know, does that answer your question? So I like being in West Virginia. I'm really proud to be in West Virginia. I was with a group of friends yesterday, and we were talking about how our children are West Virginia natives. We are not. So sometimes our children don't think we've done them any favors, but I think we have. One of my favorite comments about this book came from a friend of mine who said, I can't imagine that anybody who reads this book who's from around here will feel good about themselves. So the folks at WVU Press have been calling this the anti-hillbilly elegy. And it's not that I'm Pollyanna or anything like that. I recognize lots of problems, but it's not very often that you get to point out what a wonderful place this state is. More questions? Yes?
So you didn't marry any of those 4 men?
I didn't marry any of those. You have to read the book. But I do have 2 husbands, so it's not completely. But my next book is really about my husband and my son. And the working title of it is Both Ends of the Spectrum, because my husband's really, really smart. But if you drop Simon and Stan in a field and told them to make their way home, Simon would get there. And Stan would. More questions? Yes?
Yeah. Did you find New York City a great place for photo opportunity on the streets of New York?
The question is, did I find New York a great place for photos? Yes, but I don't have that many pictures of New York. I do have a Leica, and I shoot black and white. I haven't developed film since I was in New Jersey. The darkroom at my house now is really just the end of my garage, and I don't have running water. I have several rolls of film that I need to process still. My friend who has a gallery has been yelling at me to take black and white pictures. Digital photography is really fun. You never run out of film. And, but I also say, you know, I used to be special because I had a camera. I was a writer and a photographer. Now everybody's a writer and a photographer. Some friends of mine were down the other day from out of town, and we had fun, and they went back, and after they left, I thought, we didn't take a single picture. So, but New York was fun. I do have, there's one photo in my portfolio that's from New York, but it's a portrait.
That's a book in itself, I'll bet.
Well, it's just a great place, and I'm going back there in October, so to visit. I have friends in New Jersey, and yes.
Why didn't you branch out into digital if you can do the film, easily anymore?
Well, why did you branch into digital if you can still do film? Because cameras are cheap and easy, and I have the other day there was a fox in my backyard. I'm so excited. I'm like, I need to go get my camera, and as soon as I moved, he was gone. And then I realized, I have a phone in my pocket, what an idiot I am. So I like digital. I shoot a lot of pictures. I just entered this project. It's called Women in Appalachia project, and I entered 3 color pictures. I'm also sort of a Luddite. I just shoot the easiest way. I don't shoot raw. I have never, ever in my life used Photoshop. I don't know how to alter a photo. Sometimes I wish I was, because there's this great picture that I wanted to enter, and right in the middle of the field was the septic system pipe. Well, anybody with Photoshop could get rid of it, but the other thing, what I like about film is it's really hard to lie. And there's a good bit of my book is about how I can't lie. I'm not able to lie. I'm not good at it. It's one of the reasons I'm a journalist. I can tell both sides of a story, and you can make up your own mind. But I don't like this current world where people think everybody lies and pictures lie, and they don't know what the truth is. I'm really bothered by that. But I tell the truth, so you can trust me. Yes.
So why did you come back to West Virginia when you were in New Jersey if your husband had to drag you?
Both ways.
Yeah.
My husband was unhappy at work, and then one of his best friends took over his department at WVU and asked for him to come back, and that's the one reason we came back. But he's pretty eccentric, and New Jersey, although it was beautiful, it's crazy expensive. I just wanted to go to people's houses and knock on their doors and say, what do you do? And all these Wall Street people, and it was just amazing. This one friend of mine, who's even more badly behaved than I am, came to visit me once, and it was around Christmas time, and we went to the city. She taught me this game I shouldn't even admit to, but we were in Rockefeller Plaza looking at the tree, and we were like close in, and she said, count how many fur coats you can touch. I don't recommend that you try that, but we touched a lot.
You mentioned that your editor really made some changes in your book, and I wondered if you might remember to give some examples of that.
One of the first things they did was take out a lot of names. So unless somebody was a character or a recurring character, they took out the names. And that was sort of heartbreaking, but it confused people, because if I named them, they should be important, and they didn't do that. But one of the real challenges of this book is it's chronological for the most part, but there are also some themes. So knowing where you are in time was the biggest criticism, because, you know, I would go back and forth. Wait a minute, are we in, 74, 76, 80s, so that really required the most work. One of the, when I was getting ready to come here, I was working on what I would say, and one of the parts I was going to include was the original chapter of me coming to West Virginia that summer, because I was driving across the country. I had a writer that I had met on the ride board at the University of Missouri, and so I talked about the writer, and I talked about how we were making such good time across the country that I decided to pull into a holiday in Reynolds. It's Reynoldsburg, it's Reynoldsville, it's right, not too far from Columbus. And because I was going to drive into the mountains when it was dark, and since I had never seen mountains, I didn't want to do that. And we went into this Holiday Inn, and King Kong was, on the TV in the lobby, and we sat there and watched King Kong, and because I was on speed, I was chattering at this poor desk clerk, and I worked at a Holiday Inn, and it was so annoying. And when I presented that first chapter at the New School, people were like, well, did you sleep with the writer? Is he your boyfriend? Or like, no, he was just a writer. And I was like, well, what about King Kong? And they finally said, leave that out. Get to West Virginia already. You don't need all those details. So that's part of it. There's a lot that was cut out. Like I said, I had to reread it just this summer, because I was talking about something and he said, that's on the book. Oh, really? So that means I get to write another book. So that's it. Somebody else had their hand up. Yes.
Was there a hippie commune in Preston County?
Was there a hippie? I don't know that our farm was ever really a hippie commune. There are a couple chapters about the farm in the book, but there were hippie communes all across West Virginia, and mostly that was because it was land people could afford. There was some in Lewis County. One of the critical readers for this book, one of the people that told WB Press to publish it, is one woman named Carter Taylor Seaton. I think that's right. And her book is called Hippie Homesteaders.
She's here.
Was she here? Yeah. I get to meet her. I'm going to Huntington in a couple of weeks, and I hope she doesn't mind if I go up to her and cover it, because again, she was one of the people that made this book happen. But people could afford West Virginia. So people, when they say this was a commune, most of the time there weren't more than 3 people there. But one of the founders turned 70 this year, and we have a big gathering every 4th of July. And at one point, somebody suggested that every woman at the party who had slept with Michael should get up and talk. And then somebody said that wasn't a good idea, so it didn't happen. If it had happened, I would have taken notes for sure.
I just moved back here on hometown after I retired, and there was a hippie commune in Wetzel County where I lived for 47 years. And the people were Jewish, very bright, professors at the community college. I had some of their children in my classes. It was a wonderful experience. But yeah, they moved here because it was cheap land and they wanted to get away from big city life, and they really contributed.
Right. There's another book called Back from the Land, and it's mostly about communes in New York State. Communes do really well until winter hits.
Yeah.
And it's tough. But this farm is still together. It ended up, I don't want to ruin the book, but the founder ended up, he was an artist, and he did an artist in residency at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and some of his students would come and visit. They would spend the spring break there or summer, and he would have them making all these projects, and they're still coming to this day. And so we have 3 generations on that farm, and It's now a corporation because when we bought it from the original owners, it's an amazing place. But does anybody know who Jonathan Edwards is? He's a singer, not the philosopher, but he's got this great song. I think it's called "The Train of Glory," and there's a refrain that says, "But when I got somewhere, my friends were on board, but West Virginia was all they could afford." That's back there.
I too moved to New Jersey from West Virginia and lived there for 3 years. And the only problem that we ran into, we lived in East Brunswick, New Jersey, about 35 miles south of the city. Some people didn't know West Virginia was even a state.
Right.
And I went to the post office and the postman, I wanted to change some addresses. He said, "Oh, I live in Richmond."
Yeah.
And that's famous, or up in Norfolk. I just wonder if you ran into anything.
Oh, yeah.
I moved home too.
People just were amazed that anybody would move from West Virginia to New Jersey. First of all, they were sure we couldn't afford it, and they were partly right. But one of in my book group, there was a woman who went to Davis and Elkins College, which sort of blew my mind. And another woman, I sat next to at one event, asked me where I was from, and I said I moved here from Morgantown, and she said, "Oh, I love Morgantown. I used to go there all the time." You went there all the time? She worked for Ralph Lauren, and Morgan Shirt Factory, she said, had the best seamstresses in the world. And so those were wonderful things to hear. So, in fact, I go to classes at OLLI. I don't know if you have an OLLI up here, Center for Lifelong Learning, and they did a program on Morgan Shirt Factory just a few weeks ago, and I got to go there and tell that story. I was so excited. So, more? Oh, sorry.
There was a rainbow gathering in the early 80s. Did you get a chance to go there and take pictures?
I never went to the rainbow gathering. I do remember the murders of the people going to the rainbow gathering. That might have had something to do.
There were 2 girls that,
Right.
were killed.
Right. But I always said I wasn't a hippie because I always had a job. And my idea of hippies were they didn't have jobs. So, but my younger son with disabilities always says, he repeats things like, "Because you're a hippie, right? You're a hippie, right?" I don't know. More?
What other writers or photographers influenced you?
That's a good question. What other writers and photographers have influenced me? W. Eugene Smith was somebody I worshipped when I was in college because his country doctor photos were certainly a big influence, but he did this photo essay on Minamata, a town in Japan that had been poisoned by mercury. And he was beaten up, but eventually that poisoning stopped. So he really influenced me. Robert Frank. But when I was at Missouri, the journalists were kept real separate from the artists. We weren't artists. Of course, Missouri announced that no newspaper would ever use color photography on a regular basis, and so they were wrong about that too. I should be able to think of more photographers off the top of my head, but documentary photographers are really that. People use photography to make a difference. So, Diane Arbus is somebody people say, "Oh, you should like her," and she's not my favorite. I admire her work, but it's something I'm working on right now because my son is in this community of special needs. Is I often take my camera on field trips, and so I do these pictures of these people who I call live in this parallel universe, and I think of her pictures and my pictures, and I think mine are more respectful, more empathetic. I like that picture of the woman that professor said was scratching herself. I sort of included that to show that I've changed. That was that first summer. But I do take photos that I think are critical, but I think I take more pictures that are more respectful. So. Class dismissed.
To tell you about a happening. Plunged with books. Lunch with books has Pepsi, Nancy, cracks and yells and sings, talks and sings with more and more, much more. Plunged with books. At the Ohio County Public Library in Wheeling, West Virginia. It'll make you feel like yoga. Hey, yogi, 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 yogi. Hey, yogi, yogi, mostly on Tuesdays at noon. Bring your lunch. We'll provide the pot. And it's all free. Lunch with books. Knowledge is served.